Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and before I introduce tonight's guest, there are a couple of announcements that we didn't make onto tonight's community calendar. So I'll start out by reading them off, and then we'll go to our main feature. On Saturday, May 14th, from 1 to 3 p.m., there's going to be a cooking program that's sponsored by the Field of Green Farmers Market. Amelia Lord is going to teach a class, Transform Your Produce, World Cuisine, and it's being held at St. James. And if you're interested in it, you can email foodandcanning@hotmail.com. The Fields of Green website also has info. Another thing, this week is Jane Jacobs Week. Tomorrow is actually the 100th year since she was born. And it's a good time for especially viewers who live in New London and other urban areas to walk around and look at what's there now, think about what's there was there in the past, and think about futures for walkable cities. And one more, the primaries are over. Every year the state of Connecticut has an audit of 10% of the votes after both primary and general elections. And the Connecticut Citizen Election Audit sends regular citizens to observe town audits. And they are looking for volunteers. I've done it for about 5 years now. You learn really a lot about the voting process. And you can go to ctcitizenonaudit.org and sign up. It's pretty painless. And because it was a primary, they're not anticipating that people will have to be on site for more than a couple hours. So without further ado, my guest tonight is Lauren Shaw. Lauren is running for state rep, the state assembly this year, District 38, which is includes all of Waterford and a slice of Montville.
Yeah, southeastern corner of Montville.
So they've switched the districts around a little over the years, but and she is going to be on the Green Line. So we're going to talk to her about her ideas, and well, anyway, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. I guess I wanted to start and just have you talk a little bit about how you became involved in politics, and specifically how you got active with the Waterford Green Party.
Well, I suppose my political involvement began in high school. My civics class was offered 5 positions to work on a campaign, a U.S. Senate campaign for a candidate, and my teacher offered up my name, and I accepted the position. So that was kind of the beginning of it for me. So I knocked doors and I made phone calls. I was 16 at the time. So
I'm guessing you liked it.
Oh, I enjoyed it. I really like talking to people, and because before that, no one ever asks you at 16 what your political opinion is. They don't expect you to have one. They don't expect it to be informed. And I didn't even think that I had a political opinion until I started looking at all of the issues and realizing that there's a lot that needs to be done. So from there, my name got offered up to work on another campaign, and it was for a lieutenant governor race. I was really passionate about that campaign. I loved the candidate, wonderful woman. And then from there, I decided not to work on the governor race. And then in my senior year of college, so last December actually, I got back in touch with a friend of mine who helped co-found the Waterford Green Party. And I started listening to what he was saying because I hadn't heard much about the Green Party or any third party really. And I was reading this material he was sending me and hearing the things he had to say, and I went to the meetings, and it was just complete kind of epiphany of this whole wider world of politics.
And actually, that sort of happened with me
Yeah.
too. I was a Democrat for 30 years, and I never really felt like the views fit mine.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the Green Party came along, and it just seemed like it was right on so many important points, yet flexible.
Very
enough.
yeah, that's what I really enjoyed about it. It was flexible, and I found talking with people that whatever party they choose to affiliate with, they say, oh, I only agree with 20, 30, 40% of it. I only agree with this part, but not this part. And I find I really don't like the fact that there's such a plurality in opinions and needs in our society, but we're just forced to conform into this binary party system. I feel like that's just, it's a disgrace to our democracy, really.
And our democracy is perhaps not in very good shape, especially as
Perhaps
we
not.
see the primary elections shaping up, and we're not seeing, at least in the mainstream media, really the whole breadth of viewpoints that
And
we
not
should
at all.
be.
Not at all. I think it's really just because everything's getting dragged more and more to the polar opposite sides, and just a battle of who can be the most confrontational and have the most extreme view, and it's a real shame. It's a real shame.
Now, are there any specific issues that you felt like you wanted to focus on?
In this campaign, or just general
Well,
going into
starting
politics?
out in general, but relating it to this campaign.
A lot of what really brought me into politics was the way that our money spent, or the way our state spent our money. And a lot of that started with DDS, the Department of Developmental Services. My brother has Downs, and I've been working with the Special Olympics of Connecticut for about, 12 years now. So every time one of these budget cuts rolled through, I would see what it would happen to my friends and my family, just horrible, horrible things. And when I started looking into the politics behind it, I couldn't believe that some of our most vulnerable citizens were often the ones on the chopping block when it came time. So that was something that really drew me into looking for alternative solutions.
And that seems to be as true now as ever. You know, it might have been
yes.
10, 12 years ago, but
And it's not just DDS, it's MHAS, the Mental Health and Addiction Services, which frankly right now those are the services that we need, especially in areas like Waterford and New London that are being hit by the opioid epidemic.
Oh, yeah. So I know a lot of people look at budgets and they think, oh, well, just spending less is better, but really prioritizing the money and figuring out where you're going to get the return on investment is what's key. I think
I
about
agree.
some of the things that we're spending money on, and it's like,
It really looks like pet projects. It looks like something that someone can slap their name on and just move along. And I really, when it's slow and it's a slow trickle and people don't realize at first, oh, we'll just take a little bit from DDS, a little bit from MHAS, you know. But those are the little pieces that compound into just a bigger issue than we'll be able to handle, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We'll be staring into it, wondering how this happened, and it starts now, and this is why we need people involved now.
and sometimes if you don't pay now, you pay tenfold later.
You pay tenfold later.
Before the show, we were talking a little bit about UConn too. You're a student there, and it isn't that the state isn't spending money there,
Oh, not at all.
but from the point of view of a student, what kind of impact is the state spending having, and what the choices are in what to fund and what not to fund?
Well, the common cry that comes out of UConn every year is, they're cutting our budget X amount, which often is a tad exaggerated in my opinion. It's usually they're cutting the amount that we asked for, not the amount that we're actually receiving. But UConn is, and has been, receiving less money, but that I feel like a lot of the costs that are being incurred directly by students. So a personal example, UConn right now is in the process of moving its West Hartford campus into downtown Hartford. and that's where its law campus is. And so they apparently, I'm not exactly sure on the details, but something involving the parking lot for that campus, they didn't plan it right, they didn't allocate funds for it, whatever happened, they didn't have the money for it. So what they decided to do was create a parking fee or increase a parking fee for the entire campus, or for all of the entire university, somewhere upwards of $100. And it's funny because all of the regional campuses really fought this, because that money is not coming into the regional campuses. It's not coming to Avery Point, which is where I attend. It's not coming to Avery Point. It's not for our infrastructure. It's out of our pockets straight up to wherever they want it to go, really. And the regional campuses protested it to the point where I know, at least in Avery Point, the campus police officers said that they refuse to go around ticketing students who don't have parking tickets because it is not a valuable use of their time. So stores, what they do is they've been sending a Yukon police officer down to our regional campus to ticket people every other day.
And I assume that person is directed to be sure to make, ticket enough people that it pays that person's salary, but it might not.
And the tragedy with doing that at Avery Point is that it's a very small campus. And I know that the community really, really values that property. It's right there on the water. It's gorgeous. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's beautiful over there. People go running there. They take their dogs there. They do family pictures there. It's a gorgeous campus, but because of these ticketing rules, there's only about 15 spots for the public to park in without, fear of getting some sort of ticket out of it. And that's just really a shame, because that's restricting access to the public to this public university's campus.
Right, and this is state-owned property. It's
property.
Tax exempt. All of the citizens of the town should be enjoying its resources.
I agree, and
they're not.
And they're not. They're not able to.
Well, we talk. It seems as though we talked about this a little before the show too. When I was 20 years old, it was 1969, and young people were becoming very involved in politics, largely because of the Vietnam War and the draft and the civil rights movement. And it seems as though now is the first time in decades that we've seen young people really becoming active in politics. We've seen that through the Bernie Sanders campaign. We've seen it through interest in the Green Party. So I guess I wanted the point of view of someone who is young
20
now.
years old and involved in politics.
Yeah, so what do you think are the main issues that are drawing young people into politics now that wasn't happening 10 or 20 years ago?
And I believe I said this to you before, but I think it's the convergence of some of the similar things that were happening in the late 60s, where there's war that really hardly anybody supports, just constant warfare. So there's the war, there's this debt that's crushing students. I think it's something like total national student debt is in the trillions of dollars. And just a real, I suppose there's other confluence of factors, but I think those two main things really go towards it. And then there's a power with being politically involved that I feel a lot of people my age, they feel disenfranchised by adults and by, the leaders, because, predatory loan systems. There's just a general lack of respect. They call us Generation Y, the millennials. I've probably seen a million videos today about how millennials are the worst generation ever. And
of course, the millennials are saying no, it was the boomers.
It was the boomers, yeah. We didn't make this mess. We didn't make this mess.
We're the ones who made the mess.
And I think the climate crisis is really looming on a lot of our minds. What do they say? 3 degrees Celsius would lead to disastrous consequences. A White House Advisors Council said that if we reached that 3 degrees Celsius increase in climate change, it cost us $150 billion per year in perpetuity in damages, economic damages.
Wow.
So that's, it's imminent. It's not some fanciful rhetoric. It's right here in front of us.
And we live in a coastal community,
We do.
which could be very impacted.
Yeah, my degree is in maritime studies, so we look a lot at the impact that global climate change will have on our coastal communities, where the water will recede in, where the storms will get worse, and there's not enough forward thinking that goes into a lot of our legislation.
And I think people haven't really thought about how things have changed over the decades. In the mid-'80s, I did happen to take on a whim an oceanology course at Avery Point.
Oh, yes.
And it was like I had left college after 2 years, and I raised kids, and I just wanted to get my feet wet and decide whether I wanted to go back to school. And so I took an oceanology class, and I remember learning about El Nino, and I think at the time they said, oh, El Nino occurs every 7 to 11 years. Yep. Well, it seems like
it's occurring every 3 to 5 now.
Its frequency is much changed. It's like totally a different landscape we're looking at.
Absolutely. And El Nino, when you look at the most imminent economic damages, that happens more in South America, off the coast of Peru. It really hurts their fishery stocks and everything. That's completely different.
Yes.
That's completely irrelevant to this, but it does have global consequences. In those years, those are the years where we will get the worst snowstorms. We'll get the worst hurricanes. We'll get high temperatures in summer and really low temperatures in winter. And if that continues, if that exacerbates, it can lead to horrible, horrible consequences for our environment and therefore for our economy.
And I'm guessing the people who are, in their 20s are really thinking, wow, what happens in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years is really going to affect my life.
Yeah, it's going to affect us, our careers, our children. It's a very imminent problem for us.
So you were talking also about the wars, and I couldn't help but think that in terms of how our money is being spent, it's really frustrating to me. I imagine it's even more frustrating to you. One big, modern, new bomber could cost multiple $1 trillion, and we could actually
to sit in a storage shed, yeah.
And we could be paying for a lot of people's college educations.
We could, the amount of money spent on, the defense budget, it's astonishing. And I come from a military background. My father is a retired Navy officer. I have family that are Marines. My father-in-law is a retired Army. I have friends just getting back from deployment. And I guess that's another conversation about young people choosing to go into the military because they don't want to saddle on this type of debt. But as far as defense spending goes, more and more it seems frivolous and more, carry a big stick, but we're not. What is the purpose? Where is this bringing us? How is this helping us, our economy in the long run, instead of just creating new pet projects that won't be viable in the next 5 to 10 years as technology moves faster? And I think that money could really be invested better in education, in public health, in clean technology, something that won't have us beholden to foreign oil suppliers.
And it's even really tragic that with the huge defense budget, we're really not taking care of our vets.
No, we are not. We are not taking care of our veterans. Just the VA. Don't get me started about the VA, but just in general, I know veterans are another one of those vulnerable populations that get swept aside or put on the chopping block when the time comes because, you're like, thank you for doing your service, but we're not going to provide you with mental health services. We're not going to help you with housing. We're not going to help you with job placement or community transition. A lot of those programs that are happening are being done on a community level, people volunteering to help. That's not especially coming from our government. And I find it interesting, I should say, how, Save Our Veterans is a rallying cry for many politicians, and yet when the time comes, where are their services? Their services are cut. They're in the waste bin.
And this is something that we might be paying for a long time. We're still paying for Vietnam era veterans who were disabled or traumatized.
Absolutely.
Or who are suffering from physical problems due to their service 45 or 50 years ago.
Yep.
So we think about the people coming home now, and this will be a cost that we'll have for 50 years and beyond unless we really change what we're doing.
I absolutely agree, especially since a lot of the injuries that we're seeing come out of the Middle Eastern wars are not especially physical. I know there's a lot of reproductive injuries, and that's why actually they started a great program within the Department of Defense to allow women to freeze their eggs before they get deployed, or men to do kind of the same situation. But so there's reproductive injuries that we're not seeing, and then there's just the mental injuries. The type of warfare that was going on in Vietnam is not comparable to what is happening in the Middle East. And I don't believe that the backup mental health services being given to veterans is adequate, is updated to our 21st century situation. I know there's the statistic about how many veterans commit suicide a day or a year, and it's devastating. I participated in they call it a rucksack march. You carry 50 pounds on your back and walk the 26.2 mile Boston Marathon.
Oh
and yeah, it was actually a really incredible.
Sounds brutal.
It was brutal, but I met a lot of people, and hearing their stories, it astounded me. We actually did that march in honor of a lieutenant who died of cancer, and he didn't have the proper treatment because it wasn't covered under his insurance.
And there's no real excuse for that. I know I've met, active military people and people who are covered by TRICARE, and they say it's good coverage.
Yeah, I have TRICARE. Being a Navy brat, I have TRICARE. It's great coverage.
And so I can never understand that if we have some like public health coverage like TRICARE, like Medicare, that work well, why we can't use these models that work well for everyone else?
Well, I suppose that is the question.
And I wanted to invite people. We're going to start talking about different issues, and feel free to call in with questions or comments or whatever.
Absolutely.
Now, and I think maybe this conversation will end up shocking some people who are accustomed to watching the Green Party show, because we, our views are pretty nuanced on a lot of subjects, but very often things are more stereotypically left-wing. But that isn't, the Green Party.
There's a lot of room for a lot of different views.
There is. Oh, wow.
Interesting.
Thank you for calling.
Hi, I'd like to get your comment on this. Romney, when he was running, had mentioned that 55% of the people in this country are on some sort of state assistance. In my time in New London, I've run into many people that abuse the system time and time and time again. Way back when Clinton was running, I know he put a limit on how many, I believe either how many kids can be on assistance or dependents, or at some point when they go to school, they're off of state assistance. I think, and I feel badly for this next generation, I think there's going to be so many more people with their hand out and less people working, and there will not be a pension for the youths that are in school today, and I have a son at UConn myself. People make it their business to have many, many children so that they can get state assistance, Section 8, food stamps.
Well, I
and-
think I'm going to stop you here because, and we'll comment on it. I have to say, I don't agree that people have a lot of kids so they can get money. I know a lot of these people firsthand. I was a home visit. I worked for Head Start in the 80s and again in the 90s and 2000, before and after Clinton's welfare reform, and after the reform. I never worked with a single family that was not employed unless it was a parent who was disabled, a parent of a disabled child, or a grandparent.
I'm not talking about disabled.
Everyone,
I'm not
listen,
talking about
everyone
people
else
that
was
deserve it.
working,
Talking
but part of the
people
problem
that are able to
is,
work.
part of the problem is that their jobs were not paying a living wage. They were working in nursing homes, they were working in child care, they were working in fast food, they were all working, and I worked for 12 years with these families. But we were talking more about health care, and I think maybe we want to talk about health care. If you want to make one more comment, and then we'll go off, and then we'll to talk about the issue, that would be great.
Shayla?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. I
Okay.
just did want to address one point. I know you mentioned that not being paid wages that are, comparable to what the cost of living is, and that's certainly a factor. But I also believe a lot of it has to do with the way that our education system is forcing many students into this academic path that they either won't thrive in, aren't interested in,
That's a good
and
point.
they don't need it, and it's not it's not helping their natural inclinations to be more hands-on. I know we have several great trade schools, but I'd really like to see more trade schools, because at the end of the day, what we will need is skilled labor. We will need electricians and plumbers and carpenters and drafters. We won't need 10 more people with a marine biology degree, which
Right.
frankly is just sending jobs out of the state.
And you make a good point that the jobs like plumbers and electricians and contractors,
Absolutely.
their jobs can't be outsourced.
They can't.
You're not going to get a plumber who lives really beyond a 20-mile radius.
That
You
will
don't
cover
want to
it,
go. So it's actually keeping jobs not just in the country, but in your community.
And further, Connecticut needs about 30,000 maritime trade jobs right now. People to do marine electrical, marine welding,
Painting, I'm sure.
painting, shipyard type activities, boat operators. We need those type of people, and we initially created a trade school for that. The Marine Science Magnet School
Right.
was initially supposed to be geared towards those
Oh.
types of trade schools, but for whatever reason, somewhere up the line, it was decided that no, we need to feed more into STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math, which is great. That's a great program for kids who want it, for kids who
Right.
will excel in those programs. But what's happening now is those 30,000 maritime trade jobs are either left on empty, the people going into them are getting paid less because the companies need to train them and therefore spend money and time training them, or people from Rhode Island and Massachusetts are coming in. I actually worked in the ferry or on the ferries for a while, and I met a lot of these people who would drive the 2.5, 3 hours from Massachusetts,
Wow.
do 4 to 5 straight days of work because it paid so well, because there was such a demand
Wow.
for these laborers that Connecticut wasn't supplying. It
Wow.
was just
So yeah, I think it is a challenge of our education system, and what to try to figure out how to prepare students for the jobs that will be needed when they
that
enter
will be
the
available.
in the job market.
Mm-hmm.
But part of why I got upset is we will always need people who work with young kids. We will
Yes.
always need people to work in convalescent homes.
Yes.
We'll always need people to work in restaurants, in retail.
Mm-hmm.
In our system, it's always going to happen. And do we necessarily want these people to have to work 2 or 3 jobs to be
scrape
able to
by.
pay their rent? I worked in childcare for 30 years. I could only do it because I was married.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, if I were single, I would have been below the poverty line, even for jobs that required a college degree. And I saw some of my colleagues, and they spent 8 hours a day with young kids, and some of them had their own kids at home, and then they were tending bar or working at Walmart
Yeah,
second shift because one job wasn't earning them enough to
Absolutely.
get by, and that's not really a great quality of life.
No, and it's not just caregivers. It's not just CNAs or people
Yeah.
working in convalescent homes. My mother, single mother, she worked in public education. She was a special needs teacher, and she would bartend at night because that's the way. And I know many teachers.
Yeah.
They pick up second jobs here and there. And why are educators having to do that when some of the administration is
Right.
making a pretty penny off of the public taxpayer money that's coming into our education system?
And we don't expect other professionals to do that. Who would
We
want to
don't.
go to a doctor or a surgeon and worry that they're exhausted because they were working
up
a
in
second
second shift.
shift? And yet, I see all the time that teachers, especially those not in the public system, but to some extent in the public system as well, just exhausted, not being able to give their all because when you're working 12 hours a day, you just burn out.
It's just it's burnout, and then they're not able to interact with the kids in a manner that stimulates learning and interest and creativity, because all they're worried about is, what am I going to have to do after work?
Yeah.
Am I going to have to pick up another job? And not to mention, I know a lot of teachers have to pay for a lot of their own supplies. And then, there's always, high stakes testing that they're worrying about that's stealing the creativity from the classrooms.
Yeah, it probably isn't as fun as it used to be.
Probably not.
Well, so I did want to talk to you about the, Second Amendment issues.
Sure.
And gun rights are a huge topic in our state and nationwide.
Absolutely.
And it seems as though there's a lot of shouting and not really a lot of listening and
Absolutely.
talking on the subject. And I know this is an area that interests you. So
Yeah. It's,
give us your views.
So I wasn't raised in gun culture at all. I came to it later in life when I was 17, and I met my fiance. His father was a retired cop, and they're part of this gun club that I eventually became a member of. And there, you really start meeting people, and you're like, oh, these people aren't crazy. They're not trying to take up arms against the government. They just want to be left alone to hunt and go target shooting and go on their merry way and mind their business. But the way it's really painted in the media, and I think it comes back down to the fact that politics is more a circus than it is statecraft. So there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of shouting on both sides. There's a lot of misinformation and hyperbole. And the fact is, Connecticut has some of the strictest gun laws in the country. And yet that still doesn't seem to be enough for some people. And it comes down to the fact that not only is it stated in our federal Constitution and the Second Amendment, every citizen has the right to keep and bear arms in defense of themselves, that's the Connecticut Constitution.
Yeah.
The Connecticut Constitution has the same provision, except for it's,
Yeah.
every citizen has the right to keep and bear arms in defense of him or herself and the defense of the state. So we have double constitutional protection to, keep these arms, and the Supreme Court has interpreted that Second Amendment means you can keep handguns in defense of yourself and your home and your family. That is the way that has been interpreted by the Supreme Court. And I find it just interesting. You can almost compare it to the way pro-life people are trying to chip away at reproductive rights and abortion rights, because technically by statute, it's legal, but what can we take away a little bit at a time? And so the reaction to that, just the extreme reaction to that is, well, I'm going to, lie to officers when they ask me if I have a gun. I'm going to hide my guns. I'm going to stock up ammunition when it goes on sale. And that's not the way to keep a safe society, to keep an open society, to open a dialogue, to sustain a dialogue about this, because the fact is we have had some really tragic incidents right here in our state. And, working off of fear is never going to get you to the destination you want. So every year there's more bills coming into the state legislature that in one way or another would restrict a gun owner's rights. And I think it really comes down to education. You need to be educated about what a gun is, what the parts do, how they operate,
I'm guessing safety too, because we've seen
safety education
so
is
many
paramount.
shootings by young children.
Yeah, those always grab the headlines. You're going grocery shopping and the toddler takes your gun out of your purse and shoots himself, shoots you, shoots, the store clerk. And really what those articles never emphasize on is the fact that owning a gun is a right, but it's also a responsibility, an individual responsibility that needs to be taken seriously. Your gun should have a safety. If you're carrying it in your purse, your gun should have a safety in it. Or maybe you shouldn't have that purse with that gun in it near your toddler. I really find it interesting that a lot of these anti-gun type of rhetoric that comes out divorces individual responsibility from ownership. And I think that a lot of the pro-gun rhetoric that comes out doesn't, this is my right, I don't need to prove anything, I don't need to be educated.
And I don't need to be responsible,
I don't
really.
I don't need to be responsible. And I very much believe that if you violate one of the laws concerning gun ownership, and the reason that we have these very strict laws is because it can potentially be dangerous. If you violate that, you should face the maximum consequence. But often what happens is those who violate any of the provisions, they're given lesser sentencing. Their sentence is commuted in some way, or it's not even brought to court because who knows why. And I know that possessing a firearm without a permit, that's a Class D felony. If you possess it and you bring it out in public or whatever the exact statute is, that's actually a felony. But I still feel like there's not enough emphasis on responsibility of gun ownership and education, because the fact is 50 years ago, this wasn't a problem. There was a gun culture in America that wasn't, the crazy rednecks and the hyper liberals and everyone and their father knew what a gun was, what it looked like, what the difference between a 22 and a 38 was.
Well, things have gotten very polarized. I did notice in this most recent Connecticut session, they did pass one law related to gun possession,
Sure.
Which was that victims of domestic violence, I
Yes.
think, can request that their
So
not
this is
be permitted to have a gun. So what's that
that's
about?
That's House Bill 5054. I think you're talking about. Does that sound about the right number?
I think so, yeah.
So that is actually that's a really interesting one, because the way the law is written is when somebody brings a temporary restraining order against you. So say, back to our seminar the other day.
Yeah, me.
Bob's in the room this time, but so say that I bring a restraining order against you, and I tell the judge, she's violent, she's going to hurt me, and I know she has guns. The police are going to come, and they're going to seize your guns, and you have the choice of either selling them to a federally licensed arms dealer, or of having them kept by the police for the 14 days that it takes to process this. A lot of opponents of this bill say that it violates a gun owner's due process, because this temporary restraining order, it's not a full court system. You know, you don't have your day in
Right.
court. You don't have the chance to stand in front of this judge and say, she's making it up. That's total lies. Like, where's her proof? So I didn't know that it actually had been passed. I know it had been hotly contested.
I
found
don't
that
think
really
it's been
interesting.
signed.
Hasn't
but,
been signed.
But,
It wouldn't- I imagine it will
but
be.
the session ends tomorrow, so I guess when I looked online today, there were a slew of things that were just passed in the last day or two.
Yep. The witching hour.
Yes.
It's the witching hour. That'll be
So-
interesting if it gets signed. Yeah,
I'm expecting Malloy to sign
I'm
it.
expecting it to be signed, but I'm also expecting that it'll be brought to court. It'll definitely be brought to court. I don't what is it? It's Connecticut Citizen Defense League, or
Yeah.
so the CCDL. They're very active in Connecticut, and
They are. They're not the most rational, in my opinion.
And well, you know, every group has
Yes.
has their spectrum.
I'm sure they do.
Every group has their spectrum, even ours. We have our spectrums, and they do really try to vet every single bill that comes through because, like I said, Connecticut has some of the strictest gun laws, and I think it's really a matter of enforcement and education rather than, you know, piling up the legislation.
Now, we don't have a ton of time, but maybe just summarize what the steps are for a person to become a permitted
Sure.
firearm owner.
So the first step is you have to be, well, for handguns or long guns. There's classifications upon classifications. So long guns, it's a little less strict. You can be 18, and then if you want to hunt with a long gun, you can get a hunting permit with a long gun between the ages of 12 and 16, I believe. Might even go up 12 to 18. But what everyone really argues about are the handguns. So to carry a handgun, Connecticut says that you have to be 21 and you have to be a legal resident. From there, you have to apply to your local police department, and they will issue a 60-day temporary permit. During those 60 days, you are expected to go to the state and apply to the state for a carrying permit. Connecticut actually does have open carry, though you know, local ordinances try to fight that. They've been overturned, but technically Connecticut is an open carry state. A lot of people get their permit in concealed carry. So the process would be, you know, be 21, not have a prior felony, have been committed to a mental hospital in the past 12 months, you know, not be an illegal alien. There's a whole slew of disqualifying criteria that I think they add on to every year. So you have to make it through that. There's a whole, and then they take you through these background checks that were instituted under the Brady Bill. So you're checked in mental health records, you're checked in FBI records, you're checked, you know, for all of these things in national databases. And then before you're allowed to have this permit, and your state permit, you have to renew it every 5 years. So every 5 years, you are required to go through these background checks again.
All over again.
All over again. So it's not like you just get this free pass and then you can do whatever, and you know, you're never going to go through the system again.
Now, how is the enforcement? If we have the laws that are pretty good.
We have these great laws. Enforcement is always tricky. You know, I know there was recently a bill that came into the House about allowing police officers to ask someone to furbish a permit if they see that you have a gun on you, or they suspect that you might have a firearm, like maybe you have a bulge on your side or whatever. And I know that was fought also by the CCDL for, just harassing citizens without suspicion. So, you know, enforcement really doesn't. I don't believe, at least they don't know who has a gun, who doesn't have a gun.
Right.
And I think that's actually a really big issue when it comes to a lot of these police brutality cases, is the fact that we don't think about the fact that these police don't know what they're walking into. So there is a large amount of fear there. So police might only know you have a gun if, you know, you've been fined before for a gun violation, if they see it on you, if they come to your house for some situation and they ask you, do you have a gun? In Connecticut, you don't have a duty to inform unless you're asked. So, that's really the only ways that they find out is if they come into contact with you and
And they ask.
Well,
we have like 4 minutes left. So we're going to move away from issues, though.
Sure.
Maybe in fall you'll come back and talk
love
about
to come
issues
back.
some more. But tell us a little bit about the Citizens Election Program and
Sure.
how that affects how you're running.
So I am running with a minor party, and that affects me in a number of ways in relation to the Citizen Election Program. So in Waterford, where I'm running, are the last person to run for state representative for my party. They got something like 2.7% of the vote. Now, that is not enough to qualify me for any amount of the state representative grant, which is, I believe, somewhere in the $15,000 range. To get $15,000 from this program, I would have to, have 20% of the vote or
Right.
petition signatures equal to 20% of
Right.
the total vote of the last
And
election.
then you get a smaller amount if you get 10%.
So 10%, I believe I'd get about $9,000. And then at 15% petition signatures, I want to say it's closer to 11. So it's all partial granting. And I think, but that's on top of the qualification criteria that all candidates have to go through to qualify for this, which is raising $5,000 and getting 150 in-district signatures. So I have to, get those 150 signatures plus the 900 for that 10% threshold. And that's just to get, $10,000.
Although, for a green kind of campaign, that's a pretty decent
That's
sum.
a very, very decent sum.
So if people want to volunteer or find out more about your campaign, do you have a website up yet?
Right now, we don't have a website. We have Facebook, which
Okay.
great social media platform.
It sure is.
You can find me on Lauren Shaw for District 38 on Facebook and follow me there. We're putting up more and more content, and we're having great conversations with people we meet in the community. We'll have, event notifications up there. And we also, the Green Party, the Waterford Green Party, I'll have to plug this one. We're having a community market coming up in about 3 weeks, May 21st. And we're inviting residents and business owners to rent a spot for $20. And the great thing is you get this spot, you put up your display stand, and any money you make off of that, you just keep.
Now, I have a question. Are there any other Waterford Green candidates that people will meet at this, or are you the only one this year?
That I
I
know
know
of.
it's not a municipal election year.
It's not a
so
municipal
there
election
aren't
year.
so many.
So that I know of right now.
But you'll be there,
Waterford,
and
I'll
people
be
can
there,
ask
of
you
course.
questions,
Oh
right?
yes, always open to questions.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you so much for having me.
And speaking of petitioning,
Oh yes.
the Green Party in Connecticut is also petitioning to get our presidential candidate on the
Dr. Jill
ballot.
Stein, yes.
Dr. Jill Stein, she's a great candidate.
Amazing.
We need a lot of signatures. We need
Something like 3,000
we need about 15,000
Oh, 15
raw,
raw.
and then 7,500 valid.
Oh.
And so if anyone wants to help with the process of petitioning, I would love you for it. If we can get 100 people statewide who can get 100 signatures each, that's 10,000 raw signatures. That's a really good start to getting ballot access. So I'm told I have to say goodnight. Next week, it is looking as though we are going to have Tim Hanser on with the third and final segment on the New London budget.
That'll be a good
So
one.
we'll see you then, and thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Rana. Oh, that'll be fun to watch.